You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. She's achieved a level of mastery as an award-winning audio engineer. She's worked with bands like 3 Days Grace, Alexisonfire, City and Color, The Trues, July Talk, The Standstills, Alice Cooper, just to name a few. So welcome to the podcast, Jill Zimmermann. Jill, how are you? And what was your reaction a few weeks ago when the Juno nominations were announced and 4 of the albums that you worked on in 2022 were nominated? What did that feel like?
It felt amazing. I was a little surprised, even though I knew there was a lot coming out last year that was at a certain level and should definitely be, at least not necessarily nominated, but at least achieve something. During the pandemic, we recorded a lot, and obviously the year after wasn't necessarily the best year to release stuff, but a lot came out of it. And I saw that happening, and I just knew that those records were very special to me. So it just made it that much better. So it shows that not just I love the music, but also a lot of other people found it amazing.
Yeah, it's tough with awards and nominations because there's no guarantees. Even if you put out great music and people love it, you never know. Some stuff that you think is the best music released of the year doesn't even get a nomination. Some stuff that you didn't think was an artist's greatest stuff gets nominated. So it's hard to know. So that, I think that's why it's even more sweet when those nominations actually do come through. It feels like everything's right in the world.
Exactly. You get a little bit more confidence for sure. And it just shows you that what you're doing is probably a good path to stay on for a while. Yeah.
A little bit of positive reinforcement. So those the four artists that got nominated, Alexisonfire, 3 Days Grace, Harrison Kennedy, and Blackie and the Rodeo King. So that's a stellar lineup. They're all deserving. And I just want to take a second. I want to share my screen here. I have a little something I dug up. Can you see my screen here? Can you see this picture?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so this is you. You've received in the neighborhood of 12 Juno nominations. This picture is a little bit older. This isn't the 4 nominations you just got, but it shows, 8+ nominations you got before. I'm just giving a visual for those watching how many nominations that is. So 2 of the nominations were Juno winners. So Harrison Kennedy, the album This Is From Here in 2014, and July Talk, the album Touch in 2016. What do those awards mean to you? Albums that you worked on winning a Juno?
It means a lot for different reasons. Like at one point, yes, it's great to, not just be nominated, but also make it to the stage of winning with the album. I mean, the album won, right? So it's a whole group effort, of course. But on the other hand, too, I love that it's different categories. It's not just one category, because I don't like to just, only be nominated and winning in the same category every year. Like for me, it's all about music as music. So it was nice to see from 2 different categories that they won. It was adult alternative, and it was blues. So that's just amazing, because it shows that you don't have to just put yourself always in a little niche and just excel there, but you can just treat music as it is. And, it just reinforces, your passion a bit more too.
And do you think as an audio engineer, as a producer, as a mixer, someone that does mastering, all those things, do you think it's important to be a connoisseur of all music, to not say, listen, I only love metal, I only record metal? Is that important to be open to all kinds of music? I mean, to me, great music is great music, whether it's acoustic or full band or blues or metal. Do you agree with that?
I do, because I mean, for me, I do get where people come from when they only do hardcore music or they only do metal or only, blues and roots. But for me, when I was a teenager, I was only into punk and grunge. And then I slowly opened up and realized, you know what? Amazing music is everywhere. You might prefer more music in a certain genre, but that doesn't mean that the other genres are bad. There's gold everywhere, really. And for working wise, I prefer it because sometimes you get little tips and tricks from the one genre and can put it in the other one. And especially poppers, they love when you have like random rock tips for them to just change something up and put a certain effect on something. So it's pretty versatile because it makes you more open to just what is best for this song right now, no matter the genre. Because I mean, a lot of times you can't even really tell a genre nowadays. It's not as strict as just putting it in one, drawer and that's it. You have a lot of music that is between the genres and just is not very identifiable. So
yeah, you can see that sometimes when it comes to award nominations, like the Grammys, you can tell that they're having a hard time figuring out what category something should go in. So for example, you have bands like Muse. There's another band. Anyways, like Muse is more of like a rock band, pop rock, maybe hard rock, and they end up in the metal category. And people are like, that's not metal. Why is that in there? And it's like they have some influences of metal. And then there's one more band that was up for 3 Grammys that everyone loves. And they were in the metal category as well. And people are like, well, that's not metal either. So you can see that it's sometimes hard to pigeonhole these genres.
and it makes it harder too, because then if you're the odd one out, either you lose because of that, or you might win because the people that judge metal prefer rock and don't really know the genre of metal as much. So you're like, well, it's kind of weighted in a way that you can't really predict if that's a good or bad thing, but it's definitely an odd thing that, most people would agree that that music doesn't belong in that particular genre. It's kind of maybe there at parts, but yeah, I mean, I never saw Muse as a, metal music.
Right. Yeah. Metal, you're thinking like Slayer and
Yeah. Like if
yeah.
I tell people I listen to metal and they're like, oh, what's your favorite band? Muse? It's like,
Come
what are you
on.
talking about?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
So,
the band I was thinking of that got 3 Grammy nomination is Turnstile.
oh, okay.
So they're a band. It seems like every uh musician that's fairly popular, it's their favorite band. So I know you have a history with the Arkells. So Anthony Carone and the Arkells, that's like one of his favorite albums of the year. I know that Suave, the drummer from Ill Scarlet, that was one of his favorite albums of the year. So they're definitely deserving of their 3 Grammy nominations, but it was definitely something a little strange that they were in the metal category. I
they
wanted
didn't
to,
win, right?
what's that?
They didn't win any of the 3, right?
No, what's weird is Ozzy put out an album called Patient Number 9, and he had a different guest on every song. So he had, I think, Miles Kennedy and Slash and the guitarist that's playing with Pantera right now. I don't know why I'm blanking. Black Rebel Motorcycle Club. No, who is it? Black Label. Zakk Wylde. So Zakk
Okay.
Wylde is on some of the songs, and I listened to it, and it's okay. It's not one of Ozzy's best albums, and he won Best Metal Album and he won Best Metal Song, and it was like it felt like a grandfathered in award that, if you look at his entire career, that maybe he's deserving over time. But anyways, yeah, the awards are strange. All of this to say that when you get nominated or when you win, it's amazing because it's such the Wild West. You make great albums, that's all you can do, and whether they're hits or whether they win awards, that's totally out of your hands.
It is, because you're not the one judging them either. So, I mean, I'm glad other people like them too.
Absolutely. So before we dive into, your upbringing and your career and getting from the beginning to where we are today, I just wanted to touch on your last name for a second. So before we hit record, we talked about, my first name on paper looks like Joel, but it's Joel. Your last name, when I saw Zimmermann, I'm thinking of Bob Zimmermann, better known as Bob Dylan. So he's a famous Zimmerman. But his last name only has one N and yours has two. And you explained to me there's a reason for this. Can you go into that a little bit?
So Zimmermann or Zimmermann is actually the German word for carpenter. So there is technically no debate when you're in Germany. Everybody writes it with two N because, well, Mann is the word for, men. So that's just how we spell it. But here it constantly gets misspelled. And I always have to tell people, hey, for the credits, that's how you spell it. Yes, there's two N's. It's not a mistake. And even if the band forwards it right, then it's the graphic designer leaving it off. Like those things constantly happen. And it's a little bummer because that's just not my name. I know it's weird, but like when you constantly write your name and you have your signature and all that stuff, it's just different. And you feel like, okay, well, it's me, but it's not really me because my name is wrong. And people just don't realize that. And I mean, it constantly happens. Even when I got my OHIP card, they left it off and had the weirdest excuse for leaving it off. And when I got my driver's license here too, they had it wrong. And before I signed it, I'm like, well, that's not my name. I can't sign this. So they had to redo the whole application. And it's just, that's how I would assume Bob Dylan had his name changed because due to immigration, I mean, I don't know how quick the officers are, but that gets easily left off and then you're stuck with that,
Yeah, and it's tough when it's the actual legal stuff because if on your driver's license it's one way and then your passport is different, I mean that could get you in trouble at the airports or at the borders.
100%. So I had to make sure it's right, at least on these documents. But yeah, constantly for credits, I have to tell people, no, it's 2N. That's actually the right way to spell it globally because it's a word. Like Zimmerman in English means nothing. It's just a word, a last name. But in Germany, it's actually the word for carpenter. So it's a real word. So people spell it with 2N, please.
So we're going to dive into your backstory. So this all starts in Germany. This is actually your first podcast interview that's in English. Is that correct? You normally do them in German?
I think so. But I feel like I had maybe 1, 2, 3 years ago, but I'm not quite sure. That happens so quick sometimes. Because I feel like podcasts, you just kind of hang out with a person, it gets recorded, and then you know what I mean? Like it's not really like you're having an interview or something. That's why I don't like to over prepare. It's just it should flow nicely. So, we're just having a conversation, really.
Just two music lovers talking about music,
Exactly.
So I always like to share with our listeners how I know the guests. It shows them the importance of networking, of building communities, of relationships. In our case, this comes back to I've done 2 interviews with Chuck Daly. So he's former bass player for the Salads, for I Mother Earth, and for the Standstills. And after I interviewed him, he talked about there's this Standstills album that's coming out and they would make for an amazing guest. So then I had the Standstills on, Renee and Johnny, and did an interview with them and dove into the album. And they were all talking about you. So that you came to my attention back then with the Standstills and with Chuck. And then I'm really in the loop with new albums that come out. I'm checking every Friday. I'm listening to the music. And the 3 Days Grace album comes out, Explosion. So I'm digging into it. It sounds incredible. It has this very current / futuristic sound to it, very crisp. And I look, and there's Jill Zimmermann worked on it. And then at the end of the year, I released my top albums of 2022. And I have Alexisonfire's album Otherness on there. And I look, Jill Zimmermann. So you kept coming up. And I thought, okay, I have a background in audio engineering. So for me, it's awesome to have audio engineers on to really pick their brain and, learn about their process and being in the studio and working with different artists. So that's how we ended up here today, was just all the great work you've done. You left a paper trail that I was picking up these crumbs along the way. And here we are.
Yeah, that's how it goes. There's a lot of those people where like I kind of met them through others in a digital way. Like I heard about them so many times, I feel like I know them. And then, you end up happening. It ends up happening that you meet in one way or another. So that's what networking is all about. Yeah.
So I wanted to kick off this episode powerfully. So with you being an audio engineer, I reached out and I got some kind words from one of the greatest producers on the planet, one of the greatest engineers, mixers. This is from Garth Richardson, who made one of my favorite albums of all time. So he produced Rage Against the Machine's self-titled debut album in 1992. That's in my top 3 favorite albums of all time. And if that was the only album he did, that would be enough to put him on the Mount Rushmore. But he's also worked with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Nickelback, Motley Crue, Kiss, Chevelle, Rise Against, even Tay-Tay, Taylor Swift. So this is what Garth Richardson has to say about Jill Zimmermann. He says, "We hung out on the Jack Richardson Juno panel. I love her vibe, and we are lucky to have her in Canada. I wish people had her same drive. Say hi for me." That's from Garth Richardson.
Thank you. It's really nice of him. Yeah. It was such a great time hanging out with him. Such an amazing dude. And you just, I don't know, he has done all these records that everybody knows, but you can just hang out and just, joke around with each other. It's not like he's on a high pedestal and you have to kind of bow down to him, So I love that about him. He's just very personable. And yeah, thank you.
And I have a quick story that I don't think he even knows or he remembers, but way back when I was, I don't know, 12, 13, 14, I had put out a demo. And I remember thinking, this is the best producer on the planet. I need to get my demo into his hands. And, I found his info, I found his address, I found his email, and I messaged him. And I'm super persistent. I said, look, I'm going to email you. I'm going to message you every single day until you tell me I'm allowed to send my demo to you. And like the very next day, he sent an email back. He's like, just send me the demo. Like, don't email me every day. Just send the demo. So that's how far back him and I go. And speaking of going far back, let's go back to the beginning. So we started by talking about all the amazing accomplishments you've had and 4 recent Juno nominations, but that's not where this all starts. There is a beginning long before the success. So where did this love of music come from? Do you have an earliest musical memory?
Not necessarily, but it's just in my family. Like everybody, I have 6 siblings, so we're a pretty big family, and everyone basically plays an instrument. And when I was in 1st grade, I went to after school curriculum to learn how to read notes and all the basics of music theory and stuff. And then after the 1st year, my mom took me to an open house at a music school, and she said, try any instrument, you pick what you want to play. You don't have to if you don't want to, but we'll make sure that if you want to play an instrument, you can do that. And I, tried out a few different things, and I picked the violin, and then that's how it started. Like my oldest sister also played violin, so it wasn't like completely foreign. And yeah, it just started from there. And it's just because my whole family does it. Like even for family events, we always, got together and played together. So I think when I was 4, I was even in church choir or something for a year or 2. So it's just something that is normal when I grew up. It wasn't, foreign. It was just something that you do. You just listen to music and you play music, and that's where it started.
So the choir at 4, so vocals come in early, violin, and then the guitar comes in a little later?
Comes in a little later. I think it started because my oldest brother started playing an electric guitar. And at the same time, I got more into my own music, I'd say. When you grow up, you kind of listen to what your siblings listen to or what's on the radio. And then when I was 14, I discovered Nirvana, and it kind of changed everything for me. So I kind of felt like violin's not the most baddest instrument. And my mom has an acoustic guitar because she plays. So I just always took her guitar and just try to figure out chords and stuff. And then I started playing guitar as well. It's not something I do in front of people though, but it really helps with recording and telling people if they're in tune or out of tune, or helping them get a chord right. Yeah.
So you said the violin isn't the most badass of instruments, and to push back on that, Apocalyptica
I know.
is pretty badass, and they've done a couple songs with 3 Days Grace, including one on the Explosions album. So violin can be badass in the right
Really?
hands.
But I didn't know about that back then. There is a lot of actually pretty damn good violin players. But for me too, I'm too perfectionistic. So when I play and I hit a note slightly off, you know, off pitch, it startles me. So I can't get into this whole like flow of the, yeah, I'm just playing and you lose the world around yourself. I always stop when the note is slightly off and then I just get a little angry at myself and replay the note. And, I wouldn't say I'm a professional musician that way because for me, it's more about getting things right rather than just getting the vibe. And that can, especially for violin, you have to play with so much passion that will really come through because dynamics and everything, like violin is really a sensitive instrument. It can really speak, but you have to play it well.
Do you think that having a background where you've played violin and guitar and singing, do you think that helps you in the studio to have a better understanding of the musicians that you're working with and their instruments?
100%. Because the violin, I always joke, like, I played 10 years of violin, so I'm able to tune your vocals better. Because that's one of the things that you learn with violin. Like, you hear the pitch way more in depth and even things with another. So it helps a lot for that kind of stuff, for also making sure people are in tune, because for some reason, there is the odd people that don't want to tune in between takes. So you have to let them know that that's very important. And then the guitar helps a lot to just get the rhythm a bit more going and, to understand how people write songs too. I find it really easy to just, get more in a flow with a guitar than with other instruments. I don't play the piano, but I feel like that would be a similar instrument. And then singing, it helps so much because I started when I was in the school choir later on. I started in soprano, but then I didn't like the attitude of the sopranos because they thought because they're singing the lead, it's everyone else is not as good. But they didn't understand that it's actually harder to sing the harmony than singing the lead that everybody knows. So I just switched into the alto, and that's when I realized, okay, it is harder to sing the harmony, but it's very important because if you're off, it makes the leads sound really off too. So for now, when people, want to get vocals done and I produce vocals, it's easier for me to find harmonies. And I can sing them to them so they have an understanding of what I'm saying. Because honestly, most people, if I say, oh yeah, can you just do a third up? Like they don't know what it sounds like, like most people that are not trained don't necessarily know what note I'm referring to. But if I sing it to them, they can easily just sing it back.
Yeah, it's not most audio engineers that can sing a harmony as an example. So that's like a secret. That's like an extra weapon in your arsenal, I think.
It does help. I mean, what other people can do too, they just put like a pitch on the vocal that was recorded and then just pitch it up or down. That works too sometimes. But it's more personable to, because sometimes it's not the exact, harmony, and sometimes you just do a pedal harmony or something. So I find it just easier to just communicate with singers that way. Even like for the lead vocals to just show them how to mouth vowels and stuff, or just where to put the vibrato in the long note. It helps for them to hear it than just to hear me say it. You know what I mean?
And
Yeah.
when you think back to your childhood, what what comes to mind? What are the memories that come to mind? So you talk a little bit about music. Anything else come to mind when you think back to your childhood?
Um, I think it was pretty normal. I mean, there wasn't much out of the ordinary. I mean, sure, having, a big family is maybe a little different to some people, but because you grow up in it, it doesn't seem that different. And I mean, there was a lot of sports, a lot of just music, and that was pretty much most of the time that was being spent outside of school.
when you have a family that big, there's like a built-in party at at all times. You have enough to have a full sports team just with you guys, to have a party, to have a full family band. So there are some perks to being that many kids, I think.
They are. And Christmas, every time I had to play violin for the Christmas songs. So you can't get out of that.
That's funny. And as a kid, before you got into music, was there anything that you wanted to be when you grew up?
So I always liked architecture. So that would have been something I would have probably gravitated towards. Um, but aside from that, math or physics, before I decided, okay, it's definitely music, I wanted to do math and physics or architecture. And then, yeah, I mean, that all changed. So here I
And
am.
yeah, and how much do you think growing up in Germany shaped who you are as a person and then later on who you are as an audio engineer?
It helped a lot because I feel like there's a lot more discipline and just, you have to do things right kind of mentality. It's a little bit more, not strict, but like you just have a little different of an attitude towards things, and the good and the bad. For example, when I came to Canada 9 years ago, I was a little bit too much. Oh, we have to be on time and this has to happen and that. One of the first things I had to learn was how to have patience, and like even having patience with artists, because performing is something very personal. So you can't just, click it on and click it off and that's how it goes. So work ethics definitely helped me, but I had to relax it a bit because it's a very personal space where people have to, be able to perform. So I feel like that had to relax a bit, but definitely, you have to work hard. You have to have goals and just go towards them. And that definitely helped me coming from Germany.
And if I met you at 12 years old, who would I be meeting? What was Jill like at 12 years old?
I liked soccer and the odd computer games, and I still listen to the music of my siblings. So music wise, it was just Spice Girls and Backstreet Boys. So
Oh
not
man,
necessarily
poor you.
something. Well, it's just what was in at that time, right? I
Yeah,
mean, whatever
yeah.
is going on in MTV at that point, you just consumed. I wasn't really interested in like finding my own music at that point much. And I think the hardest music we listened to in the family was Bon Jovi and Metallica.
Nice.
So
All right, those are some decent choices. What do you remember the computer games you were playing back then?
Heroes of Might and Magic. And then there was a bunch of Amiga games like Bubble Bubble and what's the other one? Super Bomb Man. Yeah. Like my dad is a programmer, so whenever a computer was out of date at work, they just threw it out and he took it home. So we had like 30 computers at home.
Wow.
And then we had like, a Commodore 64 and an Amiga with a bunch of discs, and you just play with your joystick certain games. It was fun, you know. But we
Are you?
had our time limited to 1 hour a day. So
That's good parenting. I used to play Super Bomberman on Super Nintendo, so that was an
nice.
addictive game.
Oh yeah.
If you and I were friends, let's pretend that I lived in Germany. Let's pretend we're the same age. If we were friends at 16 years old and you invited me over to listen to music, what albums would you be playing for me?
I would probably still be playing you Nirvana. I think probably I'd start with In Utero. But yeah, that's like one of the music for like when I got into Nirvana at 14, it really stuck for a while. Because for some reason I realized, hey, everybody likes one song of them. You don't have to like the whole band, but and then I made it kind of my goal to get all my friends to like at least one song.
And you're one of the rare people that prefer In Utero versus Nevermind.
Because it's I think I first bought Bleach and then In Utero, but Nevermind I didn't buy until way later. And it's just, I mean, I like Nevermind, but it is a bit more poppy. So,
It's way more polished, right? In Utero, they stripped it down to a lot more raw sound.
yeah, and I kind of like that because that's what gripped me in the first place. Um, yeah.
What are some of the jobs that you had before becoming a full-time audio engineer? Can you remember your jobs? Any funny ones or horrible
Like
ones, or
in university or before or high
any
school?
any jobs from, I don't know, 16 years on? Did you work at a grocery store? Did you pump
No.
gas? Did you
I
deliver newspapers?
I was a waitress at 17, I feel like, because you had to pay for your own driver's license in Germany, and it's about a grand.
Wow.
So I had to make the money to get my driver's license. So I was a waitress at an all-you-can-eat noodle bar, and I babysat, kids here and there. I did a lot of tutoring in math because for some reason people seem to need it. And after that, in university, I basically only did audio related jobs. So I worked at an ad company to do the sound for advertisement. I worked at several movie sets and afterwards too for mixing. Um, and I worked at broadcasting to do the audio on set. So those were main things I did outside of, doing music.
So let's dive into the audio engineering now specifically.
Yeah.
We've talked about, you started by loving music and instruments and then getting into music, Nirvana as a fan of great music. But not everyone that plays an instrument becomes an audio engineer. Not everyone that just loves music becomes an audio engineer. So how did you gravitate towards audio engineering?
So it first started because, like I said, I did want to do math or physics, right? And then I had this holy shit moment where I realized I have to do something with music, which when I was 16, I was driving home on a bike from school and I listened to music on the iPods. Yay. And at some point, I just closed my eyes, took my hands off the handle and started headbanging and drove against the curb and then flipped against a tree. And I just remember I was so angry that something stopped me from listening to music. And then I realized, oh, I could have driven against the car and just died. Like that was stupid. So I don't really listen to music when I'm driving anymore, but I realized music has that grip on me. So when I was, I think 17, and I was a year from graduating from high school, I went to one of these job centers because we had something in school where we did a test of what we should be. And I went to one of those job centers for a personal, evaluation. And I said, look, I love math and physics, but I want to do something with music. But I don't want to be on stage. I really don't like people looking at me and I want to be behind the scenes. And the lady was immediately like, you're an audio engineer. I was like, what is that? I don't even know what that is. And she sent me to a few schools for open houses. And I remember just walking into the NEEF room of the SAE in Cologne with my mom on an open day. And I just immediately knew, oh yeah, this is home. Like this is 100% what I'm going to do. I had no clue what any of this is. Never heard of it before. At shows, I was more, looking at the front rather than back of who's mixing the music. But as soon as I walked in, I knew this is what I want to do. And it's just one of these things that just, yeah, that's how it
Well,
all started.
I think you got lucky that there was like a good, guidance counselor there, because a lot of
Mhm.
times you'd say, "Oh, I want to do something in music or audio engineering, or in audio," and they would say, "No, no, no, forget about that. Become a lawyer, become whatever." So it's good that someone actually knew what audio engineering was and was supportive of that.
Well, the difference too is she said that because my grades are good and I'm interested in math and physics, I shouldn't go the apprenticeship route. So in Germany, there's two different ways to go about it. You can be an apprentice, and that's usually more live sound. And then after 3 years, you take a test and you have like a diploma that you are a real sound engineer. Or you can go the academic route. And that's what I took. She said, like, that's probably better for you because you will be less bored. Because I wanted to know about like all these things. And I was very, just hanging out and learning from the ropes right from the beginning would have maybe not been the best. So I was really lucky she directed me towards the right direction. Yeah.
And I believe you went to two schools for audio engineering, not just one. What were those experiences like?
So the first one I went to was the SAE, so it's a School of Audio Engineering, and they had 4 different studios, and you can take as much time as you want or need, and you have a lot more experience. So I did it part time, so I had for the same like I had four, instead of just doing it in 1 year, I did it in 2 years, because then I get 2 years of studio time, you know? So I only had classes on Fridays, and all the other days it was like you have to teach yourself certain things, and you have to basically go to the studios and just do projects. So after those 2 years, I did another year for the bachelor, but it was way less studio time. And then I felt like I'm not ready yet. I want to learn more. So I went to the, what's it called? University of Applied Sciences in Düsseldorf. And I thought because they have a studio, you get studio time, but turns out in 2.5 years, I didn't get any studio time. And it was really hard to discuss that with the professor too, because in the first 2 years, you just learn basics about everything. And then you really decide if you wanted to do audio or video. And yeah, it was great because you learned other audio things. And it really opened my mind for what is there outside of studio work. All my friends that we had like a learning group together. So we studied together. They wanted, like most of them wanted to go into the music studio, but then they found their own passion on the way. Like one of my friends is programming for Logic now. Another friend of mine is doing his PhD. Another friend of mine does film sound, and then the other one is building studios. So there's a lot of just audio work that is not necessarily just being in the studio and doing music. So it really opened my eyes for that. And you learn a lot more theoretically in that school. So I feel like the SIE really helped me more on the practical side.
And do you think someone can become a great audio engineer without going to school for it, just learning by experience? You mentioned that in Germany, there was the two options. You can kind of go the academic route to become an audio engineer, or you can go in the other sense, it looked like it was more for the live sound. So I guess I'm asking about being in the studio as an audio engineer or as a producer. Do you think someone can actually get good without going to school for it? Or is it you have a huge advantage having that foundation of an education and experience in the studio?
I think it's very valuable. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily agree, but I feel like knowing your basics helps you find mistakes easier. I noticed that, like, I mean, there is those and those. I've had worked with people that are amazing and they haven't gone to school, but they have worked at studios for years to become that good. They have never just decided, oh, I'm going to be an audio engineer, I'm going to buy Pro Tools now, and that's it. Like, you have to, especially if you don't go to school, you have to learn a lot from others, because they will tell you why certain issues happen. And like even hearing phasing, like a lot of people don't know what's wrong. Well, I can usually tell, well, that's easy, just they're out of phase, so let's just flip the phase or adjust it, and then issues fixed. But for somebody that doesn't know, they just hear something's wrong and they don't necessarily know what's going on. So I feel like basics are important that way, especially if you're hands-on. Like working in a studio, it really helps to just realize how signal flow is working, or if there's a scratchy button. Like, I can usually hear what's wrong with an audio signal and where the issue happens, because I've worked so long in it, but I've also learned about these things ahead of time. So it just helps you along the way. I feel like you progress quicker if you had the schooling, and you will need a lot more passion if you don't, because it's a little bit more of a rocky road you're going. I'm not saying it's impossible, because obviously a lot of people have done this, but back in the day when there wasn't audio schools, those people would worked at studios as an intern for years, as an assistant for years, and then they slowly went to their own way. So, just pretending you buy your own DAW and you can record yourself, I mean, that's not the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you first started as an audio engineer, who were your biggest influences as far as audio engineers and producers? Anyone that really inspired you when you started?
Actually, no. And that's weird, because a lot of people have a certain person to look forward to, or that listen to a lot of those records. But for me, because I didn't really know it's a job, and I just basically threw myself in the cold water, it wasn't like there was one specific person or several ones. If there was a good record, I listened to the record and tried to figure out what was good about it and what I liked about it. But I didn't quite look into, somebody's specific works. For one reason, because it's sometimes hard to distinguish what the like recording engineer did, what the mixing engineer did, a little bit of the mastering. Like you can kind of tell what the mastering does, but between mixing and recording, there can be so many vast differences. And then the producer too, like was the producer more hands-on, or was he just more on the creative side and let the engineer decide what mic choices to take? So it's sometimes a little bit mixed depending on who you're working with. So I wasn't even sure what to accredit that to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then along the way, so now that you've been an audio engineer for a long time, you've worked with some of the best engineers and producers on the planet. Are there any of them that you've become a big fan of where, there's kind of this track record of, if a band works with them, they tend to get a great album out of it. Anyone stand out to you?
I mean, on the mixing side, as much as people might have issues with Crystal at LG, I think that pretty much anything he mixes, it's going to sound a certain way, and it's generally sounding pretty good, especially for radio. So that's, for example, a mixer where I'd be surprised if there's a mix coming out that I wouldn't like. It's just one of these things. For engineers, for example, I've worked with Mike Plotnikoff, and everything he engineers, it's just so good and so detailed and flawless. Like but that's also because I've seen it. It's hard for me to judge the engineering because in the end, if I just hear the finished product, how much did the engineer do or not, right? So it's easier for me to say that having seen how he works and just, I know that whatever he's engineering is going to sound great. So there's those. And then for producing, I mean, there's just so many people that just do amazing, right? Like you just mentioned Garth, like how can you not like his work? If you don't like the one record, well, there's going to be 20 others he did that you love. So there's him, for example, Bob Ezrin. He is pretty good at just getting really great music as a producer. And then yeah, I mean, there's so many people really.
Yeah. Yeah, what's funny, you mentioned when it comes to mixing, it was Chris Lord-Alge that you mentioned, right?
Yeah.
So
He's just
I
pretty
remember
consistent.
there was a period of time where literally like every hit rock song or every hit album, you turn it over and it was either mixed by Chris Lord-Alge or Andy Wallace. I think it was like
Andy
those,
Wallace is
it
amazing
seemed like
too.
those two. It was one of those two that every big album that was mixed by.
I mean, Andy Wallace did Nevermind, so there's always a little bit of love for that because it sounds amazing. And yeah, Andy Wallace too, like everything he mixes, it's going to sound good. And that is hard to accomplish because as a mixer, you get everything thrown your way and then you have to kind of wrestle to make it sound the way you want it to sound. So I find that is quite the art.
Yeah. And for our listeners that don't know everything about recording studios and audio, where they might not know the difference between the recording phase, the mixing phase, the mastering. Can you kind of break down the difference between maybe the roles of a recording engineer that's doing the tracking, a producer, the mixing engineer, and the mastering? So maybe those four, I guess, kind of walk through the process for our listeners, educate
Yeah.
them.
It's also important for musicians because there's a lot of times they are not quite sure what's going on. Like you record them and then they're like, okay, let's go to mastering. Like, hold on there.
Well, you don't
Kind of
want it
skip this step.
mixed? Yeah.
Kind of
Yeah.
hard to master this right now. But so the recording engineer is the person that sets up the mics and plug them in and chooses which mics, which inputs, which preamps, compressors, all of that before it gets recorded. So that's the recording engineer that makes sure that that live sound that is being played gets recorded up to that spot. And sometimes a producer does that too. There is producers that are very hands-on, and there's some that literally just tell you, you do what you do. So that's why I said it's sometimes hard to distinguish because I've met producers that tell you straight up, I want this on the kick, this on the snare, and then you kind of follow it, and then you do it your way, like still the positioning and everything and getting the sounds in. So that is the recording process. Once it is recorded, you can still edit, like that's the editing phase technically in between. If the vocals have to be tuned, if sections have to be cleaned up, like sometimes it's you have to edit the drums, or just especially for hard music, the drums are generally edited. And then you organize things with the producer too. Like sometimes they want a certain section cut out. So you do that, send it to the mixer. The mixer gets the files, generally all just consolidated. He doesn't see what has been edited and cut and whatnot. And ideally it's all labeled because that's a recording engineer's work. And they take that work, generally not having the producer necessarily right in the same room, but that can happen. And they basically put the sounds level wise, EQ wise in a mix that is ideally you get it like very widespread and have some depth, and you can hear every element of it to a certain degree. I mean, obviously every music genre changes a bit, but that's what the mixing engineer does. He basically takes all the stems, like all the single tracks that have been recorded, and
All the
makes
instruments.
Exactly. And it turns it into a stereo file, or if you have 5.1, into a 5.1 file, but it's one continuous file that has all the instruments in it. So basically condenses all the files into one file. And then the mastering engineer is the one that takes it, and it's kind of like the finishing touch. You make it louder, so it's at the same volume that is nowadays acceptable for radio and streaming. Things are recorded way quieter. Now, if the mixing engineer sends it to you loud, that's because they don't want you to come back and say it's quiet, because a lot of musicians don't really know that that happens after. But then put it at a certain volume, and they also take out frequencies that are kind of in the way. They make sure that it's nice and polished and sounds ready to be released. And they also add all of the metadata. So they put into the song the artist, the name, the RSSC code, the UPC, all of these things. So when you basically put the CD in, back when there were CDs, you see all the information come up. That's the mastering engineer. And if you want an album, they lay it up for you too. So you can choose to either have the 2 seconds in between each track, or you can have them flow into each other. The mastering engineer would be the person to put that in.
They could do the hidden tracks in there somewhere.
Yeah, all of that. They basically make the finished product ready to be duplicated. Yeah.
Okay, so just a very quick recap. So you have the tracking where you're recording all the instruments. Then the mixing takes all those instruments and makes it sound like one song. And then the mastering takes all those individual songs and makes it sound like an album. And then you would go out and purchase that after manufacturing, I suppose.
Exactly. And if there's different mixers on an album, the mastering engineer would also have to make sure they sound from the same source as if they're from the same album. So they might have to take a little bit of low end off on the one song, but add a little high end here, just to make it all seem like one product. If there's different mixers. Generally, if it's one mixer, it will sound very homogeneous. So it's not like way off, And then the producer, generally it happens from the very beginning before tracking until the very end. So the producer there's different kinds of producers, obviously, but usually help writing and arrange the songs. In some cases, even decide on which musicians to hire extra if you need some extra instruments. He'd be there during the tracking phase to make sure the performance is right. He's the one generally picking the tracks and saying, that take was better than this one, but maybe on the end, the one before was better, and then splice those together. So the comping generally is done by the producer or decided by the producer. He's the one comping the vocals. So you have different takes of vocals that have been sung, and he takes the best words or phrases from the best takes so that it's the best product to his ear. And then aside from that, he is the one saying yes to the mix. He can decide that with the band or the label, whoever is really involved, but generally the producer is the one agreeing to a mix being done or wanting changes. And then the same for mastering. So he's the one basically making sure, yep, that's the right direction. Maybe, you know, turn this instrument a bit up or not. So sometimes the producer is also the one deciding where to go with which personnel, who's tracking, who's mixing. But then sometimes it's the band that decides it. So that can be different every time.
So you've done a great job of breaking down the different stages in the recording process. Now, one more breakdown that would help our listeners is when you graduate as an audio engineer, not everybody works in a studio. Can you explain the difference between audio engineering in the studio, doing live sound, which is concerts and events, and then more on the corporate, like TV broadcasting, radio side? It's all audio, but what would you say are the biggest differences between those different fields of audio? And you've done all of them, so you can touch on them.
Yeah, that's right. I also did live sound. But I would say studio, you're focusing most on the best performance and the best capturing of that performance, because it's going to live on ideally forever. So for you, it's more about getting the best out of the artist, you know, trying to get them to feel comfortable enough to perform a certain way. While live sound is a little bit more on the technical side, because you can't just tell the band halfway through, hey, do that song again, but like do this. You really just let the band do their performance, but you have to worry more about, okay, everything has to work. If there's a mic outage, I have to be quick and just replace something. If there's feedback, you have to correct that. You have way less feedback in the studio because they usually listen back with headphones. But live, it's a little different unless you have in-ear monitoring. So you have different things to worry about. So studio, you worry about having a great performance and capturing that nicely. Live is more about getting the mix done quick, being able to change it during the set, because who knows, maybe the guitar player changes his guitar and the output is a little less. Well, then you have to bump it up on your end. So you have to continuously listen and maybe also go around the room to see how it is somewhere else in the room.
I don't know if I've ever heard a live guitarist turn down his amp, right?
No, but the
They
thing is,
usually
you have
they're at
like,
10 and they want to go to 11 when they play
yes.
live.
But if you change your guitar and it has a different output, it might
That's
still
true.
come out a little different. And you know, things like that might happen. Or it's just a little quieter song and people play a little different. And at the same time too, yes, you have feedback. You really have to watch, because you do not like to have feedback in the live space. But you also can't really communicate much with the band and tell them to do anything different. That's where the band is on their own and it's very separated. Like you do your technical issues, band does their performance, while the studio is a little bit more interweaved. And then broadcasting, it's a very different world. Like for me, you learn time management so well. You have somebody that literally just tells you the times of, you have 2 minutes to do that, to have 1 minute until we change from this scene to this scene. Like you have really, really strict time issues, and you have to be prepared for if there's a mic outage. Like it happened once where I had to just run in and just hand the mic to the one person because it wasn't recorded. And you have to be very on call. Like it's a very, for me, it was very high adrenaline, it was good adrenaline, not like the stress, but it was like, okay, I'm needed, because if something goes wrong, it's life. You have to be able to fix it quick. And I also had like an earpiece. So I heard in the regie, they told me if something wasn't coming through or if something goes wrong or, you know, stuff like that. And on the top of that, when you do have musical guests, you have to hide all of your mic cables because it doesn't look good. So you always have to watch this whole how things look. And then sometimes people wear certain things where you put the mic and it's a little bit more challenging because it doesn't necessarily, like if they have a wide cleavage, well, you have to put it on the side. But then if they move their head, you have different distance from the mic. So they are constantly changing. So there is those kind of challenges. Or once we had a violin player and he refused to take his violin down while being mic'd. So you have to like work around that. So there is a lot of just different challenges at all because it is live. And you have very strict times because you can't be in the picture as soon as alive again. Yeah.
There you go. There's your breakdown. So not not everyone that graduates in audio engineering goes on to find a job. Not everyone goes on to, even those that do find a job in audio engineering, not all of them go on to have success and get nominated for awards and all that. So at what point, when you started as an audio engineer, at what point did you know you had something special to offer, that you could actually make a living doing this, that this could be a career, and that you weren't just some other schmuck in the studio, that there was actually something of value here that you could offer?
See, I never really thought about that because as soon as I saw the Neve for the first time, it was an 88 RS. I remember walking in, it's like, that's it. I didn't really care about making a living or not. It was, I'm gonna do this, and that's it. Like there was no question about me, and I mean, my parents were a little worried because the school was pretty upfront and said usually 1 or 2 students per class even get a job after. It was very bleak. It still is pretty bad. Like, well, not bad. It's just more people want to do it than there is the need for people to do it, right? So
Right. Well, there's less and less studios because of the whole Pro Tools revolution and digital and all that stuff. Almost everyone has some form of a home studio. So even though most people don't know what they're doing at home. Most people aren't going to produce something as high quality as an actual studio. It still cuts into the budget of the bigger studios. So you have less studios, less high-end professional studios like the one you work at.
but you also don't need as many audio engineers as are being trained in schools. Like, I mean, if you think about all the schools in Canada and how many students are starting every year, we don't need that many more. So it is just a general, I'd say, weeding out of the people that just are stupid enough to keep doing it, and the ones that are probably smart and realize, well, the chances are really stacked against me, or maybe realize they have a different passion along the way. So
When you found out from your school that only 1 or 2 people in the class are going to make it, did you feel like telling everyone else they can just go home because you knew you were going to follow this through to fruition?
no, because I'm not cocky that way. Plus, I mean, it's fun because they had their own sessions, and because for some reason in my class, barely anybody knew how to use the consoles. So I was always the assistant on almost every session. So I had to like pledge everything in and set it all up. And half the time they only knew where the talkback button is. And then I had to teach them before all of the exams how to use the console. So it was practical to have other people around for sure, you know. And plus, if I didn't make it for one lecture, I'd have other people to tell me what I missed. So it was good to have other people around for sure. Yeah.
So we have a fan question sent in here, and this touches on, we talked about you made your way from Germany to Canada, and we have a question from Sean Matthews who touches on that point. He says, or he asks, why did you decide to come to Canada as opposed to the US? Was it the music scene or the talent? Was it a connection you had? Was it an education opportunity? And if given the opportunity, would or will you expand to the US or even back to Germany? So it's a lot of stuff there. So basically, why Canada?
It was an accident.
You took the wrong
It sounds
flight
so
and you
weird.
ended up in Toronto.
Sorry?
You hopped on the wrong flight and you ended up in Toronto.
Kind of. So for me, in the second school I was in, that was a little bit more theoretical. It is technically supposed to be 3.5 years. And one of those semesters, you're supposed to do a practical semester. So I was like, well, doing it in Germany is kind of boring. So I have the opportunity to go somewhere else. And because I lived in New Jersey when I was 16 for a year, I had connections there with somebody that I knew was in a band, and he knew a studio, and I would have been able to go there. And then one of my professors, Hans Martin Buff, who worked with Prince, he had connections to the US too. So I had like opportunities to do an internship there, but it was very clear it's just an internship for just half a year. That's it. And then I thought, well, I might as well just like write to a bunch of other studios. And somehow Jukasa was the only Canadian studio. And I don't even know how I got there, to be honest. It was like a late night Google search for studios. And they responded and they said, well, we kind of don't need an intern. We need an assistant engineer. So I was like, wait, that's way better. So why would I settle for an internship if I can do an internship with a possible ability to like, well, not possible. I kind of was very confident that once I'm there, I'm going to make myself indispensable. So that happened, and that's how it all came together. So I did look for the US, but I mean, I'm kind of happy I ended up in Canada. I like Canada. And then I realized how much music comes out of Canada. Because to be honest, when you're in Germany, half the time it's just an American band, but you mean North America. You don't mean America as in the country, but you mean more the continent of North America. So half the time you're like, oh, it's an American band, and then you realize, wait, they're all Canadian? And then I think I started realizing that when one of my friends was like, so you're gonna work with the Flatliners or what? I'm like, oh, they're Canadian? I didn't know that. And they're just in Toronto, right? So, and I started looking more into it, and I realized so many bands are Canadian, which because of the distance, you don't really separate it much. And then I realized I do like a lot of Canadian bands, so I'm pretty happy about that.
Can
Yeah.
you remember the first few Canadian bands that you liked?
So I think Flatliners, because I saw them a bunch of times, because they go to Germany all the time. Billy Talent, definitely.
They're huge in
Um,
Germany.
they are, because when I was in New Jersey, I actually saw them play. And it was funny because I was in New Jersey for about a year at that point and I haven't spoken German much. And I went to the show, and for some reason there was a bunch of Germans, and I didn't realize. I'm like, I understand what they're saying, but I don't know why because it's not English. And then I clued in, like, wait, there's a bunch of Germans here. And then it was like 50 people only, but the whole first row was just Germans. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
I
can't
think
do that too.
it's different. I think that Billy Talent is biggest in Canada and Germany, like not the US, not other countries. Those are like the two big Billy Talent
Which
countries.
is weird because when I lived in the US, all the background music in MTV seemed to have been Billy Talent. So it's like they hear it all the time. They kind of know it, but people just don't realize it, or it doesn't catch enough to, go on fire and just makes them. It was weird, but yeah. They are big in Germany and they're big in Canada. But generally, a lot of music in Canada gets like once they go to Germany, they do pretty well, I would say, especially rock. It's still a big thing in Germany. Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Jukasa Studios so we can see that you're there right now? Is this like a surround sound room for movies? Like what are we in right now? And can you tell our listeners where the studio is, a little bit about it?
So the studio is located on native land. It's close to Caledonia. It's actually in Oshweken. And it's, I'd say, like 20 minutes south of Hamilton. So it's not too far, but it is very rural, which is why we also have apartments so people can stay and actually get the whole experience, not just they record for a week, go home every night and get out of that bubble, but they stay with the whole band and just get fully soaked into the whole recording process. And we have a recording studio with 4 isolation booths. And then what I'm in right now is the Atmos room. So it does Dolby Atmos. It's for movies. But I'm in here right now because the other room is being used. I'm generally more in the music side. Although I have worked out of here a few times for free projects. So yeah.
And what would you say is your favorite part of the recording process? Normally, I ask musicians, and for them, it's like, do they prefer the writing of the music or the practicing with the other musicians or going into the studio, or what part of it? I guess for you, do you have a favorite part? Is it like setting up the microphones or the equipment? Is it working with musicians? Is it documenting everything? What is it that you love most about being in the studio?
I think what I like most is when everything is just set up and you realize it's all working and we're just smooth sailing from here. Because like setting up can be sometimes not hectic, but it's more for me. I want to do it all right. I don't want to have a wrong patch. I want to make sure that all the phantom is in where it should be, that things are sounding good. So I'm less enjoying it because I don't really have the time for it, because I don't want bands to wait. Like for me, it's very important to set up quick. I do not like this whole, like we've had producers with their own engineers come and then it takes, I think the longest it was so far was somebody took 4.5 days to get drum sounds. And that's just, I mean, the musicians are bored, everyone's kind of just waiting around. For me, I want to get going quick. And then once everything is coming in at a good level and it sounds good, and then I have this like moments, and then I can just enjoy and listen to the music and just be a little bit more of a listener because I know technically everything's running. Pro Tools is hopefully not messing up. And I mean, everything from there on is a little bit more enjoying because I'm sitting back and hear what they came up with. Because a lot of times I don't even know what the songs sound like ahead of time. I just go into a session. I'm like, okay, I kind of know what instruments you have and what you are trying to achieve, or maybe I know your earlier work, but I don't really know the songs that you're doing today. And then that's always a great experience to just hear what people come up with.
Do you have a favorite microphone to use to record vocals in the studio? So I know every singer is different. I when I sing, I have a high nasally voice, so I need a microphone that like boosts the low end and shaves off the high piercing frequencies. So I know it's different depending on the singer, but do you have a favorite vocal mic? And there's lots of good German mics, so I feel like that might be an answer. I don't know.
Yeah. So it's not just the mic, because there is a big difference on which mic pre you use and which compressor you use. So for me, I love the U67 and to a Neve preamp. For me, ideally the 1073, and then going into our wonderful Blue Stripe 1176, because it sounds lazy, but it makes you work less because it automatically gets the good sounds going. Like if you have really good gear, you actually have to work less because you're not fighting for like getting certain frequencies in and out. It just makes it so much more effortless. So that is what I prefer. And generally, I would say 80% of the time, a 67 or 87 works. 87 generally for people that I trust less with a mic. Not gonna lie. If I see people constantly move the mic stand, I'm like, yeah, you get the cheaper mic, because I don't want the mic to like fall over or something.
Yeah, some of these mics are quite expensive. I've seen like
I guess it depends on
$10,000
what you're
mics,
doing.
20,000. It's pretty crazy. I
I guess
have at home, I have I think it's like a $1,500 TLM 103. That's my favorite mic for my voice. But there's, that's 1,500, which is a lot for someone at home. But in the studio, man, some of these vintage mics are like, you could buy a car for the price of those mics. So you don't want someone to break them or drop them or
I
steal
guess
them.
it depends more on what genre of music it is too. Like I would never put that kind of mic in front of a heavy singer. Like if you're singing metal or heavy music, sorry about the SM7B. Unfortunately, $400 mic still wins because you can't get those people to be stationary, and you don't want them to be because it does not sound good. Like I always tell people, like I can hear if you're not moving. If you're just standing still in the mic and singing, I can hear that. And then I usually look, I'm like, yep, hands on the pocket. Like you have to move. And especially if you have heavy music, you kind of need a mic that I know is not going to distort, and that you can just hold in your hand and just scream your little heart out, But it depends really on the genre at that point. Aside from that, though, if you just have pop singers or, blues or even jazz, I would go with a 67, 87 for sure.
So for our listeners today, if some of them are feeling inspired and they would like to become an audio engineer, do you have any advice for those people that would help them along the way to become a good audio engineer, or even maybe someone that just graduated and they're trying to build up their resume in their career? Any advice for audio engineers?
Don't ever think that you know everything. Like it's hard when you, like, sometimes there are people that want to intern and they say like, oh yeah, I know everything, like I've done this for years, and you're like, yeah, but I don't want to work with you because you're telling me what you think you know instead of actually listening to me or whatever else is going to happen. For example, I love working with other engineers, because then I learn from them. I learn either how to do things maybe a little quicker or faster, or I learn a shortcut, or even learn how things not to be done. Like, sometimes there's things where I'm like, yeah, I know it works, but it doesn't work for my workflow. But still, you learn something. The same with producers. I love working with other producers because then I get a little, view of how they do things. Just be open to learn from others, because in the end, you will learn for the rest of your life. Like, this is some of the greatest jobs there is, because you never know everything. Because then there's a new plugin out, or there's a new, new genre you're working with, and things are a little different. Like when you do bluegrass, you can't do it all separate and record one instrument onto each other. They have to have it all at the same time. And also, like, you know what I mean? Like, every artist works different, every genre works different, and then every studio works different too. So just be open to learn, because you will for the rest of your life learn.
I think that's great life advice in general, is never think that you know everything, right? There's always more to learn. You can always get better. Let's dive into your discography. So all the albums you've worked on, either as an assistant engineer, as an engineer, digital editing. So I'm just going to read through a few. I mean, I can't read the entire discography because there's too much. So I'll read through a few notable albums, and then we can spend a little extra time on a few of those and dive a little bit deeper. So here is just a fraction of your discography. So we'll start in 2014. So Harrison Kennedy, the album This Is From Here. July Talk, the album Touch in 2016. 3 Days Grace, 2018, the album Outsider. And also in 2018, the album From the Trues, Civilian Airs. 2020, A Protest the Hero. Hopefully I say this right. Palimpsest?
I think it's palimpsest, but I mean,
okay,
it's a real English word, so you
okay,
should know better than me.
I'll look into that. 2021, Alice Cooper, Detroit Stories. That's pretty epic. Another Harrison Kennedy album, Thanks for Tomorrow in 2022. Lots in 2022. So everything else is in 2022. Silverstein, Misery Made Me, Blackie and the Rodeo Kings, Oh Glory, Two City and Color singles, Meant to Be, and Underground. 3 Days Grace, Explosions, Alexisonfire, Otherness, The Standstill, Shockwave. Man, you've had a busy 2022. So we'll dive into that. But I want to go back to the July Talk album in 2016. This was one of the Juno Award winners, which is pretty exciting. You actually recorded to tape for this album. And it makes me, when you mention that, that makes me go back to when I was 18 and I went to school for audio engineering. And we had a project where we had to edit a Weezer song on tape. And it's such a nightmare versus the digital audio workstations working with Pro Tools, where you can try and undo and zoom in. And it's beautiful, the technology. Man, tape is difficult. Can you talk about what it's like recording to tape, maybe editing to tape? I'm not sure.
So we didn't edit to tape because we only had one tape in total for the whole record, and we had to reuse it for all the songs. But it was, I think, the biggest setup, because tape is a little bit more of a delicate medium. So we had to record pre-tape and then print it back post-tape, so that we do have everything definitely for sure. And it was good because the producer, Ian Davenport, insisted on it, and he knows. Halfway through the record, some of the tracks on tape kind of just faded, and you could see that the tape just wore out, which it shouldn't have been, but I guess it was old tape and was a little brittle, and it was not possible to get a new tape in time because we were mid-session. So we had to, for example, at some point use a sub-kick mic from the pre-tape, and then, line it up and make sure it's all correct. I love the workflow because it was just a little bit more relaxed. It wasn't like, okay, let's do it again, let's do it again, let's do it again. Because we had to, once the tape was full, play it back, and the band came in and listened to it. And then they also had more of a sense of what they wanted to change in their performance. And for the producer too, it was easier for him to say, look, like, you played it this way, but maybe for the next ones, like, play it a little different. And yeah, it was great, but it was also the only session I did to tape. And even in school, you don't really learn tape anymore. Like when I was in school, the SAE had a tape machine, but they didn't teach it. They just gave you tape to practice your own things. So I just did that on my own. And then in the other school, the teacher full on said, it's an old technology. It'll never be used. You'll never have to deal with it. So we're not going through it. Which in hindsight, I had a feeling I'll use it one day. So yeah, it was definitely pretty amazing to just have a very different workflow through the whole record. And it was also without a click. So it's not like you could just, print the click too and just line it up that way. So yeah, it was pretty intense.
Did you find that the tape that it gave the album a certain sound, like a warmth to it, or did you feel like it actually made a difference versus recording digitally?
I feel like it did. Now, we're talking about maybe 1 or 2% difference. It's not like noticeable to most people, but I feel like it gives it a little bit more of a warm, glued together vibe. I mean, it could have to do too that, when you record to tape, you treat it maybe differently, or, there is many different reasons why it could turn out differently, but I feel like it definitely helped the album. And it also not being to a click. I mean, Danny is such a good drummer, it wasn't an issue, but you couldn't really take one take and then take the next one and just match it together unless you add it in between to make sure that it all flows. So it was a little bit of mix and match that I had to do with the producer after a song was done to make sure it's all there and that's the take we're going with and that's what the rest is going to be recorded on. Yeah.
So you've recorded to tape just one time and it wins the Juno. So maybe 100% of the time that you record to tape, it's going to win a Juno. We don't know that because we haven't tested the theory. I'm just going to plant the seed there. So
could be a statistic, but I mean, the problem is money, right? A lot of people don't have the money to record to tape because tape itself, I think it was $650.
for
I'm not
one
sure if that was
reel,
US. One reel.
man, I
Got
remember it was
me.
like $300 and it was expensive. So $600.
Well, because
And
they don't really make it as much anymore. And they had to import it from the States. And then it was not good. So they actually complained. And I think they got a new reel, but like 2 weeks after we're done recording. So I'm not sure what, maybe they sold it or whatever. But tape is expensive that way. But then also there's more studio time, right? So you have to pay for the setup of the tape machine because it has to be demagnetized and it has to be fully dialed in and calibrated. And then it has to be cleaned in between sometimes because there's a little bit of residue on the head. So you have to clean that up. And it takes just a little more time to reverse and put it back and print it. So there is a lot more studio time you have to pay for too. It's not just the tape. So you have to be really rehearsed. And I think a lot of people don't realize or are maybe afraid of having this ultimatum of, yeah, you can't just, overdub a million times. Like, just gotta have your shit together.
yeah, it might not just be that they're afraid. They might realize that they couldn't pull it off. Like you have to be well prepared, but you also have to be like a world-class musician. And all of you, if there's four or more, you guys all have to be great musicians, know it inside out, well prepared, and you have to play perfectly together. So some people probably just aren't capable of pulling that off.
Yeah, so there is that whole hurdle for people to come over. And that's why it's been the only session to tape. So I wish there was more because it is a lot of fun. And it's just, there's a certain smell through the tape machine. And I think musicians value it a bit more because they know it's just real on that tape. It's like your music. You can't really see it, but you can see it. Like Pro Tools is just a digital representation of where it's stored, you know. So
Yeah, yeah, some people are still using the analog tape. When I did the interview with David Bottrell, who's won 3 Grammys and worked with Tool and all these other bands, he was saying when he worked with the Smashing Pumpkins, so their album Oceania, they did a lot of stuff to tape, which was different. So they had like a smaller console, they had tape. So to me, it's like a nightmare. Like, I don't know how I would pull that off, but that's why he's the man. And I asked him, like, is that daunting, or is that difficult? And to him, it was fun, like to have different equipment and to tape, and it changes everything, like you said. So in the studios, every band or musician, they're all different. Some people like recording in the morning, some at night, some all the time. Some people only come in at midnight, and when they get inspiration, they'll record for 4 days straight. July Talk had something very unique that they would do. Do you want to touch on that? They would take a break at the same time every day.
Yeah.
Why is
It
that?
was dinner time. So in the morning, they set up a crock pot in the apartments, which was great because halfway through the afternoon, you smelled it when you were like going down the hallway. You're like, oh yeah, the food is getting ready. You like smelled it already. And then we all took a break at dinner time and just all ate together. And there were times I'm like, oh yeah, I can just stay here and like edit. And they said, no, we all take a break. We all go together into the apartments and we all eat together. And it makes you feel a little bit more part of the project too, because there is times when it is a little bit more separated, where producer and band are a unity and then you're just kind of a little bit on the outside making things work. But then there's the times where you're a little bit more included, and they were making sure that you definitely are included and you eat together and just have fun. So that was really special.
That would add like an extra layer of um, I don't know, closeness. That would add something to the recording sessions that like we're all a team, we're all a family, we're all working towards one common goal.
It also just makes more fun working with those kind of people, right? Because then you feel appreciated. And it's not like, okay, well, you could have been any other engineer. Like, no, they wanted you as a person to be part of this. And it's it's just more fun to work on those kind of sessions, because then it doesn't really feel like work, to be honest. You're just listening to good music while it's all set up, pressing a few buttons, right?
So in 2018, you worked with 3 Days Grace on the album Outsider. I did a little bit of digging and I found some information most people probably don't know. They have a song called Right, Left, Wrong. And
Yeah.
there's a female voice speaking in English and German. And
Yeah.
you happen to speak English and German. Is this your voice? Are you
That's
featured
me.
in a 3 Days Grace, not just a song, but
I'm
on a
opening the
single?
album.
Oh, that's the
I'm
first song on
opening
the
the
album.
album. Yeah.
So that is
I'm
you.
the first voice to be heard. It's funny because they also charted in Germany and they always joke like, oh, it's because of the German voice.
The German
Uh,
connection, yeah.
yeah, it actually happened that they were writing the song and then Siri went off and said, I don't know what you mean. And they record, they're like, oh my God, that fits in the song. But then because of copyright issues, and you can't probably just use Siri because you didn't pay for her voice. You
Because
know, it is a
that's a
really
real
technical.
actress. Yeah.
Exactly. So they wanted somebody to redo that. And I mean, I was kind of the only female around, and they did want to stick with a female voice. So I did that a few times. And then Neil said, just do it in German. Like maybe that works. Because they also got me to translate Outsider, the song, into German. And there is a version somewhere on our computers where I sing it in German for them to like hear the flow. But then they said it would just not work because it is too hard of a new language for Matt to sing, because he doesn't speak German. So it's just very foreign and it's hard to learn. So they scrapped that idea. But yeah, they kept the German into Right, Left, Wrong.
That's
Actually, I'm
amazing.
also singing on Otherness. I don't know if you know that, but
On the Alexisonfire album?
yeah. Yep. I
Man,
screamed.
you're gonna have your own solo album if we keep going this way.
Well, I don't know about that, but last year was actually my stage debut. I've never been on stage because, like I said, I try to be not on stage. I just want to be behind. But then I went to one of the 3 Days Grace shows in London, and it was just backstage and hanging out. And then Neil, the drummer's wife, was like, "Oh, you're going on stage with them?" I'm like, "Oh, no, I'm not." And then there was one song where they got a bunch of people on stage, and she just like shoves me right up there. And then it was so much fun. But I didn't really know the song lyrics because it was a song that I haven't recorded with them. So I was rocking out a little bit more. But
Did you
it
dance
was,
more than you sang?
I sang in between, but I'm pretty sure it was thankfully turned down a bit. Yeah. So I did rock out on stage for the first time last year. So that's pretty amazing.
That's
Plus, there
awesome.
was also a big crowd. It's not like you know, when you start out as a musician and you get like these empty rooms. I cannot imagine how that's like, because I was very, 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 very nervous. But I think once you were up there and like everybody was just laughing at me because the band didn't know about it. So I think Brett and I think it was Brad first. Will he just looks at me and just like, what? What are you doing? You know, and then Barry looked at me like, Jill, like, is that you? And then I saw Neil just like waving to me. And Matt was actually the last person to see me because he went through, there was 3 other girls on stage that were supposed to sing the song. And he goes to the first one, okay, second one, now was the third, and he's like,
Jill?
what? I know you. Like, what are you doing? It was fun after that. Like after you get this like initial, stage fright dealt with, it's a lot of fun. Yeah.
So let's talk about the year 2022, which was an incredible year for you. There's the pandemic for 2 years, and there's no live music, but then studios also, you're not, you got to shut down. You're supposed to be in quarantine. You're not in isolation. And then it's like everyone came back with a vengeance in 2022, where there was all this incredible music and this pent up energy and aggression that people needed to lay down on tape. I already read through the list of albums. I read through about 7 albums that you worked on in 2022, and 4 of the 7 are nominated for Junos, which is like a ridiculous percentage. I have a kind of a strange question. So we mentioned that it's let's see here. So we have the Harrison Kennedy album, we have Blackie and the Rodeo Kings, we have Alexisonfire, and we have 3 Days Grace. So those are the 4 Juno nominees. You actually have 2 of the 5 nominees in the Rock Album of the Year category. So you have Alexisonfire and you have 3 Days Grace. Is that awesome because you have 2 chances? There's 2 chances for the award to be won, or does that suck because at least one of them can't win?
I mean, it's bittersweet that way. It happened a few years ago where 3 Days Grace Outsider was nominated at the same time as The Truth, and then Arkells won it. And everyone was like, Arkells are not even really that rock anymore, they're more pop. So that was a little sad because you had 2 chances and none of them won. But I mean,
but you also had a history with some live stuff with the Arkells. So it's like there's
it was
part of
actually
you...
the first live band I did. It was funny because I didn't know the band before at all. And I just remembered it vaguely. And it wasn't even one of their normal shows. It was, they did the show the night before across from the street from where I worked. And they did a Motown spin-off show there. And that's why I got to help out and do it. It was my first live show. And then coming to, Hamilton area, and all of a sudden everyone's like talking about the Arkells. I'm like, what?
People love the
That
Arkells.
band? Like they're Canadian? I don't know. Yeah. It turned out that way. It was fun.
Yeah, it's crazy. The Arkells, every year they do a big event called the Rally, and it's just the Arkells. They have a few openers, but people are there for the Arkells, and there's 27,000 people. Like they're so big in Hamilton, and but other places as well. They play Toronto, the Canadian Tire Center, and it's sold out. Like it's wild how big those guys are.
Not in Germany yet, but they'll get there.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're the inside track to they, what? They need to do an album with you. And then they got
I haven't done an album with them yet. The only time I worked with them in the studio was when Max produced some of the songs for The Truth. So that was pretty much the only time, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so an album you worked on in 2022, Silverstein, Misery Made Me. So you're an assistant engineer. I have some kind words sent in from a member of Silverstein. So this is from Josh Bradford. And he says, Jill is super knowledgeable and kind. She's calm and patient. And she has the skills to set up a killer mini putt course. So what is he talking about? There's a story here that I don't know
about. They were in for 6 weeks, and it was actually all the records that came out in 2022 were recorded 2021. So I worked with them the year before, and because, like I said, I was an assistant engineer, and Sam, the producer, Sam Guyana, he is very hands-on. Like he needed me just to help him set up stuff, and I was editing vocals, so I wasn't as busy in those 6 weeks. I mean, I worked on it, yes, but not to the capacity of the rest of the albums. That's why I was just an assistant engineer. So some of the free time, because all the guys loved golfing, and we have a golf course nearby, and there's a bunch of other golf courses too. They kept golfing all the time. And I'm like, we're doing vocals like today. So the whole rest of the band is kind of not occupied, and we're doing vocals in the vocal booth. So I just set up like a 4-putt mini putt chorus for them, going from like easy, just like straight line and like a little bit of things in the way, to actually a ramp that goes up into a Stanley Cup. So yeah, I can send you some photos of one or two of them. It was fun because the guys appreciated it, because this way they were more occupied when they didn't really have to do much.
That's like a mix of your architecture and physics and all those things that you love to make the perfect mini putt course.
You know, you got to make people feel like home, and they love golf so much, so why not?
They're actually playing Ottawa next month. So I saw those guys way back at the St. Catharines Scene Fest. This is like, I don't know, 20 years ago. This is so long ago. That's how far back they go. I've seen them in Montreal. I go way back with Silverstein. So I'm excited. I'm going to see Big Wreck tomorrow night in Ottawa, and then we'll go check out Silverstein next month.
Nice.
They put on a very intense live show, which is great. Do you remember the first time hearing music that you worked on get played on the radio? Do you remember that at all? Which band it might have been, or which song? You're in the studio, and then suddenly this thing you worked on is now out there in public consciousness, and people are digging it.
It would have been July Talk, because Push and Pull got a lot of radio play, and it still is to this day being played. I feel like Push and Pull and Back and Call seems to, at least from when I hear the radio and I hear them come up, seems to be the most played songs of theirs, and that's from the record I did with them. So I think that would have been probably the first. Yeah.
Do you remember what it felt like when you heard it the first time on the radio?
It's surreal. It's just like this weird feeling where you're like, wait, I know that song. Like, it takes you a second to just realize it, and then you're kind of in shock for the rest of the song. So you need a second time to actually fully appreciate it, because you just kind of weirded out. You're like, wait, I know that song. Wait, that's being played on the radio. Like, you just, it takes a bit to just get used to, for sure.
Luckily they played it a lot, so you were able to get used to it with, it played over and over, and it still plays now. Let's take a deep dive into Alexisonfire's album Otherness. You already know this, that I had it as one of my top 9 albums of 2022. You were kind enough to provide some behind the scenes info about it for that episode, so I appreciate that. So for our listeners, I'm going to share a little bit of info about this album. So debuts at number 4 in Canada. There's 3 singles: Sweet Dreams of Otherness, Reverse the Curse, and Sans Soleil, which is my favorite song on the album. And this is their first album in 13 years. And Darren, who also provided some behind the scenes info, Darren, who's at the same studio as you, he mentioned that this wouldn't have happened without a global pandemic. Can you speak to that a little bit?
So what we heard from the guys when they wrote the songs, they were stuck because their jobs kind of stopped as well. I guess except for George, because he's also a firefighter, so it's one of the essential services. But Christopher Steele, for example, who's generally a barber outside of Alexis, he couldn't work for a while. And then Beardo, Jordan, he couldn't drum with Billy Talent in that time because, no live music happens. And then the same for Wade. And I feel like it was, and Dallas
would have been on tour, for sure.
He would have also not been able to really play. So everyone was kind of just in this weird, you're in a hamster wheel, and all of a sudden it stops and you look around, and they needed some kind of outlet of getting, the feelings and emotions out of them, because it was just not possible with how they generally did their life. And I mean, life can sometimes get the best of you, and you kind of just you don't necessarily get creative because there's so much distracting you and responsibilities that you have. But everyone was stopped at the same time. And I think that just really tied them closer together because they are longtime friends. And, that's the time when you reach out to your friends and ask them how they're doing and sharing song ideas. And that's when they really got together and decided, you know what, we have all of these song ideas. Let's do something. And they did have a few songs before. There was 3 singles they did before this album. So it's not like out of nowhere. They have been playing before together. It was, I think, 1 or 2 years maybe that they played a few shows here and there, and they had 3 single releases. So it wasn't out of nowhere, but it was more concentrated, I feel like, because they realized, let's do this thing again. Like, let's not just do a single again, but like a full album, because they have so much to say. And it was also one of the albums where a lot of other things happened. It was the first time that the bassist Christopher Steele was writing a song. Or I think he wrote 2 or 3 actually. And then George was not just screaming, he was actually singing. And he has a beautiful low voice, so low and growly. That was kind of by accident in a way. I mean, he knew he can sing and all that, but he was still a little insecure about it because it's not what he generally does. So I was actually recording him for one of the songs and he sang it. And I just kept saying, like, man, it sounds really, really good for this song. And then I think it was Wade who came in. It's like, oh my God, this is amazing. Dallas walks in, loves it. And then everybody's just continuously, it was a big love fest. Everyone just encourages each other to just, yeah, that's your idea for the song. It sounds amazing. Let's do this. So it was it was a group effort on their behalf. Everyone was in the same mindset, had the same idea together. And even for Sans Soleil, it was Wade's song. But Wade said, like, you know what, Dallas, I think it would sound better if you sing it. And, there was no ego in between them. There was no, oh, it's my song, I have to sing it. It was just, no, I think for the song, it turns out better this way.
And how talented is that band? I mean, you just named all the different members. They all have their own side projects that are successful. It's wild. I mean, they're so talented that you mentioned to me that your job was basically to just capture the magic. Like, they're so talented that they would play and you just have to be ready to capture what they're doing.
And another addition too was Matt Kelly, who I think for the first time played with these guys. He plays with City and Carlo generally too, but he added so much more vibe because he plays basically any instrument you give him, he plays. Like, he's just very talented that way. But he's also just a very great person to be around. So it was this one outside perspective that got brought in that really enriched the band as well. To add, intros here and there, or just play the pedal steel on this one song, which they didn't really have those instruments before. So it just gave them more of a versatility to be, okay, what do we want? Let's put it on. And not what can we do, but more what do we want? What do we need? It was a little different than if you're just like, okay, what am I able to do? And then you stay within that realm. It was more like, this is us. Like, let's do this right.
When I was posting about that album, Otherness from Alexisonfire, I'm tagging band members and making sure everyone sees it and word gets out. And I saw that this Matt Kelly guy liked it. He liked a few of the Alexisonfire videos. I'm like, oh, cool. Who's that? And I look into it and it's like, he plays with them. He plays with City and Color. So I was like, oh, that's awesome that he actually saw, my stellar review of the album, which is cool. I have some kind words. Can you handle some more kind words?
Maybe.
We'll
Not
see.
used to that, but
I
that's
know,
okay.
I know. We're never used to, we just do our thing with our heads down. But I got some kind words. This is from Jordan Gauthier, who had a hand in the Alexisonfire album Otherness. He's on the drum side with YC Drum Company, and his role is to make sure that the drums sound incredible for Ratbeard. And this is what Jordan has to say. Jill is an immense talent in the studio. Her ability to capture performances with precision and the utmost quality is truly something I've always admired when I've been fortunate enough to work alongside her. Her genuine kindness, humor, and wittiness allows for a stress-free and truly enjoyable work environment. She has already worked on numerous amazing and notable projects, and I truly believe that it is only the beginning of her successes. That's Jordan Gauthier.
Thank you. Yeah. I've worked on a few records with him providing the drums and tuning them. Yeah.
There you go. Let's dive into the. It's hard to just accept
It's so
all
hard.
these kind words, you know.
It's harder too because I feel like I was the fifth of seven kids. So that's when like the compliments don't pour in as much anymore, because everything you do, somebody else does better in a way. Like not in a negative way, but it's just not something I am personally used to. So when people say compliments, I'm usually just like, okay, thank you. I don't really know what to say. Like I appreciate it and I take them in and I'm really happy for them, but it's just sometimes hard for me to know how to respond to it verbally. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Almost everyone I share these kind words with, they don't know how to take it. You know, it's awkward, but you just take it in, and you're
Mhm.
thankful, and that's it. So let's dive into the 3 Days Grace album, Explosions. So this one again nominated for Rock Album of the Year. You're an engineer on this album, 4 singles: So-Called Life, Neurotic, Lifetime, I Am the Weapon. What's insane, and I've said this before on the podcast, is there's no band in human history that's had more #1 singles on the Billboard rock charts than
In the
3 Days
US.
Grace in the US. Like that's as big as it gets. So they've had 17 #1 singles on the rock charts, rock and alternative rock. Two of those, so they had 15, and then two more from this album go to #1. It's wild. If you get just one #1 song, that's unbelievable. To have 17, which is more than a full album's worth, not just of hits or hit singles, but legit #1 singles. I can't even like put into words how incredible this is. So do you have anything to say about the two #1s that came off of that album? So So-Called Life and Lifetime.
Yeah, so this was a definite pandemic record because the guys were writing in the first part of the pandemic, which they would have done regardless because they had the album cycle from Outsider and then they had the touring cycle to tour the album. And then they already planned on writing or just, taking some time off anyways for 2020. So timing for them really worked out. And then when they came back and wanted to record, I think there was still issues with like crossing the border. So Barry lived in the US, the guitar player. So it was very pieced together one by one. So Barry basically flew to LA and recorded guitars with Mike Plotnikoff and Howard Benson. We got the guitars and started recording vocals first, which is very unusual flow. Usually you do drums and bass and guitar and then vocals, but we started with guitar to get the rhythm section right. And then we needed to do vocals because Matt was expecting a baby. He lives a little up north in the area of Peterborough. And he didn't want to come all the way to a studio because what if the baby comes early? Like he wanted to be there for his son. So obviously we had to figure something out. So we, like me and Darren, we went up north to Neil, the drummer's chalet. He has a little like amazing place out there with so much forest around. And we stayed there for a week. But before we did that, we went up for a weekend and built a vocal booth in a closet, in a walk-in closet. The downside is there was no AC, so whenever it got hot, he kind of had to get out of the booth. So there is downsides and upsides for everything. But then we brought up really high-end equipment and had to do a test too and send it to Howard Benson, who was the producer. And when he agreed, yes, this vocal quality is great. Like you can't tell it's not in a studio. Like you guys did a great job. Cool. Then we went up for a whole week and he sang 1 to 2 songs a day. And this way, it was only 5 minutes from his home. If anything were to happen or, his partner's getting a kid, like he was immediately accessible. And it also came, I think, a week or two after. So the timing was really good. But it was also nice to just not just be in the safety zone of the studio that and you kind of know the ins and outs, but to be, recording on a laptop with still high-end equipment, and we still use great mics, but it was all a little different. So we had to make sure that at all times, like, okay, we have to close the windows because if somebody's driving by, you can't hear that, things like that. You have different challenges. So that happened. Then we sent that back to the editor. No, actually to Howard to comp it. He sent it to the editor. We got it back from the editor and then recorded drums in the studio. So Neil came by to the studio. We did it in, I think, 2 weeks. I think we had some days extra, so he used them for his own projects as well. And then Brad, the bass player, came down to the studio for 2 days, and we did bass last. So that's a very unusual way to record, but because they already had very organized, they knew the song structure, they knew, what they want to achieve and what kind of sound they want, and they are also experienced enough to do it that way. I would never recommend that to a band that's new, but they've done enough records and they all know what they're capable of. And they know also their limits. For Matt, for the vocals, he knew when his voice is starting to not be prime. And that's when we had to stop and be like, you know what? Take a break, because if we break your voice now, you can't sing tomorrow. So, just that's it. Like, see you tomorrow. And like, it's just everyone is so experienced already. They knew how it all fits together and how it all works. And it came out amazing. Like, I love the record. I love the songs on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is unusual. The bed tracks is normally, the drums and bass laying the foundation, and then everything's playing on top of that and building from that foundation. So to do it kind of in reverse shows the level of quality of the musicians, of the engineers, to kind of build this structure differently.
Yeah. Now, like, I think when they did record guitars, they had like fake drums to play to. So it's not like he played just to a click. And they had like I think it was just a reference vocal, so he knows where in the song he is. But there wasn't much more to it. So yeah, it was very, very different. And it was always this, okay, like, this is the real tracks, and we have to, like, take this away now. Like, we had to, for example, take the vocals away that we recorded and import the ones that were already edited in the final vocals. So it was very interesting to work different, but it shows you can if you need to. And it was definitely during the pandemic, nobody could fly anywhere. The band was literally separated because Barry, the guitar player, was in the States. So all of the songwriting would have also happened over Zoom.
It's a very pandemic album.
Yeah. Hence explosions,
Yeah. So speaking of drummers, so Neil Sanderson to me is one of those rare drummers that has the ability to create hooks with his drums. So normally hooks you think is like a vocal thing or a guitar thing. But to me, there's just a few drummers like John Wysocki of Stained, or Chad Saliga of Breaking Benjamin, and then Neil Sanderson of 3 Days Grace. To me, those three, it's this special gift they have of adding these little hooks that you don't know why, but it's just something extra they add. Do you agree with that statement? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yeah. He is an amazing drummer for so many reasons. One, the way he drums, yeah, like how he arranges what he drums when, it does create certain hooks. Like, I can play you the drums of I Hate Everything About You, and you'd know it's that song without hearing the rest, right? Like, that's definitely a very catchy one. But aside from that, he hits really hard. And if I say really hard, I mean, I think he is about as hard as Jordan from Alexis, if not even slightly harder. Like, he hits one song and there's a full-on dance in the snare. But that makes the tone. And I think a lot of people don't realize it's not just about tuning drums. It's not just about recording drums. If the drummer doesn't hit the drums, you don't get the resonance. Now, for jazz, it's a whole nother thing because you have all the dynamics in there. But for rock, you want a hard hitter. And when we did the drive-in show, so we recorded a live show for 3 Days Grace to open for Metallica while there was the pandemic going on. And like, it was, I think, in 200 theaters or something at the same time. He actually killed 2 of our SM57s. He just decapitated them with his
The
hand.
microphones just took the top right off.
And they're microphones that you can talk to any audio engineer. They're usually undestroyable. But give it to Neil Sanderson and he just decapitates them. Like the capsule was completely just broken. I couldn't even put it, like I kept one just because I'm like, this is insane. I'll never in my life see that again, because that is just how hard he hits. Like during the live show too, he hit this big of a chunk out of the cymbals. And I'm talking like it started with this chunk and another chunk and another chunk. And it's like, how hard are you hitting during one live show, man? But it makes the sound. And I can tell that because Darren has a drum set here that he owns. And a lot of bands start using his drum set unless they are sponsored or have their own. They usually just don't want to like carry it around, or if it's for a single, you know? And I know the drum set. I know how it sounds. I know how I mic it up, how it generally, you know, turns out to sound. And there's the odd time an indie band comes. I'm like, what's wrong with the drums? Something doesn't sound right, but I'm doing exactly everything I usually do it. Like the mic placement is right, like the cues are right, like what's going on? And then I look at the drummer, I'm like, oh, he doesn't hit the drums. That's when you can tell when you like put the mic gain up a bit more and it still doesn't sound the same. Like you have to hit the drums with all, like full rock, once again. You know, when you have a drummer like Lionel Lewis, very different story. Like he makes the drums sing in a very different way. They sound good, but he doesn't play hard. He can, but he doesn't have to. It's very different that way. But yeah, it makes a lot of his tone.
We have just a few minutes left, so let's dive into one final album that you worked on in 2022, or that came out in 2022. So the Standstills album, Shockwave. And man, I got a quote here from Johnny and Renee from the Standstills. So we're giving you practice on receiving these kind words. So Johnny and Renee, the Standstills, they say, Jill is next to none when it comes to her drive and ambition to make great albums. She strives to put her best into her products, and that could be the understatement of the year. We loved working with Jill and consider her a ninja in her craft, but most importantly, a friend who cares about the power of music and she respects the arts. At heart, we believe she is not just another person who understands the science, she is an artist. That's Johnny and Renee of the Standstills.
Aw, that's so nice of them.
There
Yeah.
you go. So
It was great working with them too. Like they're just so talented. Yeah.
and working with them, did they go into that studio? Did you go somewhere else? Was it done remotely? How did this album come together?
So we did it in 2 chunks. And I remember that because I always do for albums, I usually do like an album chart. And the first one was before Christmas, so they had a bunch of Christmas pictures, and the second one was around Easter, so it was a bunch of Easter pictures. But it was in 2 chunks, so it was 6 songs then, and I think another 6 then. And they came to the studio and stayed there with Neil. I think Chuck came out for the days he was recording bass, but not for the rest of the time. And it was a very close knit process. Like, you know, it didn't just end at 10 hours. Like sometimes we just went upstairs and, you know, hung out with them after, or, you know, just hang out. It's very different when people stay for a longer time. And it's also different because they're very nice people and it's so easy to get along with them. So yeah, it was just a great time.
And we should mention that there are 2 people involved with this album that were involved in the 3 Days Grace Explosions album, right? So we had Neil Sanderson. Instead of being the drummer, he was here on the producer side, and there was also Howard Benson, who produced the 3 Days Grace album. So Howard Benson, for those that don't know, this guy's won 2 Grammys. He's been nominated for 16 Grammys, and he's worked with everybody. I have a list of like 30 big bands that he worked with. I'm not going to read them, but Google Howard Benson. How different was it to work with Neil in this capacity as a producer versus Neil as a drummer?
Very different because I mean, Neil as a drummer is also still Neil a producer. He produces a lot on the side, so he still, gets a lot of creative say about the songs. It's not just like he's just a drummer and that's it. Even for 3 Days Grace, he's involved a lot in the synths and how the song should sound and how to arrange things. Like he is a producer at heart, definitely. So I feel like it was different seeing Renee drum and him just kind of producing her drumming. I mean, he didn't have to do much because she's an amazing drummer, but like tell her the odd time, oh, you know what, like maybe in this spot, change to this symbol and then do this kind of, beat. And he could show her better because he's also a drummer. So he could literally just go behind and just show her, which is way easier than just trying to talk about it once again. But he's a very creative spirit. Like he has so many ideas and he's very open to things flowing. So it's not like he comes into the studio and he's like, that's what we're going to record and that's how we're going to do it. Like, not at all. Like he's open to changes and you know what, let's do that. And if it doesn't work out, he's like, that's fine. We tried it out. Let's go the other way again. Like he's very quick in that way. He's very just natural, I feel like. Like it's definitely something I know why he still does it. Like he has a production company with Howard Benson called Judge and Jury, and they produce a lot together. And you can tell that he is a very natural producer. Like that's just something that comes easy to him because he's also a piano player, very good one, I feel like. And he just on the side can just easily produce you a little, synth beat on the backside or something. So it's easy for him to talk about music and just, get things going.
So
Yeah.
I have one final quote before we wrap up, and this
Yeah.
is the longest quote of the interview. This is from my boy Chuck. So Chuck Daly, who played bass
Nice.
on this Standstills album. So former bass player for I Mother Earth and the Salads. And this is what Chuck has to say. So this is a long one. So here we go.
Okay.
Jill is so unbelievably amazing. I had the extreme fortune of tracking the Standstills album for a few days with Jill, and I've been dreaming about the opportunity to work with her again ever since. The entire session, she sat right beside me, giving me the support I needed, making my ideas come to life, and creating a general vibe that simply made me want to play as hard and good as I possibly could. And sometimes when I screw up, but I like the idea, Jill would, as sung in one of my favorite Ben Folds songs, she would fix all my shitty tracks. Jill is an audio genius, a superpower of tone with editing skills that make us musicians feel like we've practiced an additional 10 years leading up to the session. I've been making records for over 30 years now, and I've never run into someone quite like Jill. She may be the best on the planet, but also incredibly humble. So we'll congratulate everyone else on a job well done. Not to mention, if she comes to see you play live, she's going to dance like nobody is watching. It's very true. I saw the video. So, which in turn, it does it again. It makes you want to play your ass off in response. Everyone needs to know about Jill. Her work has brought millions upon millions of people joy. We are so lucky to have her making all the best in Canadian music sound the way it's meant to be heard. A final word of warning, though, if you're going into a session with her, be cautious around her microphones. Don't touch. LOL. So that's from Chuck.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. He's just such a pleasant person to work with. Just very positive. He knows his tones, which makes my work always easier. Yeah.
He's a monster bass player.
He is. He plays very melodically. Like you can sometimes when guitar players turn into bass players, you can tell that they're not really bass players, but Chuck is like he understands the bass. He knows I am sometimes even more important than other instruments because I'm rhythmic and melodic. It's just bass is very important. It's like the foundation. If there's no, good bass in certain songs, I mean, sometimes depending on the song genre, I get it. It's different, but when you have a good bass line, it just makes you dance without knowing why.
The bass will get you going. We mentioned before that you had worked on 2 City and Color singles, Meant to Be and Underground. And there was recently an announcement that the new City and Color album, it's called The Love Still Held Me Near, that's coming out March 31st. So that is fast approaching. How excited are you for that album?
Very, because I've heard the masters and they sound pretty darn good. Plus, the songs are just so heartfelt. I mean, just recording that too, like you always go home and you have all the songs stuck in your head, whatever you just worked on. And even now, like there's some songs I can't wait for the world to hear, you know what I mean? And it's pretty hard to sometimes not say certain things that you work on. I know when people always like, oh, what are you working on? I'm like, can't really tell you. So gotta wait for a few more months. But as soon as it was announced, I was really happy about that because I feel like people have been starving to have some more City and Color. Just like people have been starting to have Alexas, you know. But I mean, I get it. They have to separate those, even though they were recorded relatively close together. I think it was only a few months. But then because you can't, like Dallas can't just tour with 2 bands at the same time. I get it.
We wish he could.
Yeah, well, you can't clone that yet. And even then, you can't put all of that, you know, person into the clone. Like
They've got holograms now, but you wouldn't get the soul of Dallas in each of those bands, you know? So
and I mean, good for him, you know, being like that much of a powerhouse that you can have 2 very different projects from one another. But that really moves people. Yeah.
So I have 3 final questions. Can you handle 3 final? These are the
I can.
deepest, most profound questions of the interview. So when you look back on your life and career, what are you most proud of and what are you most grateful for?
I think I'm most proud of sticking through the parts where you get self-doubt. There's always going to be little times when you're like, really? Like, should I do this? Like, I think 2 years after coming to Canada, I kind of thought, well, maybe I should just, you know, move to Sweden and study acoustics and become a studio designer instead. And then we started working with 3 Days Grace. I'm like, I'll stick around for that. And then, you know, it's just led to more and more records. And but I feel like there's always, everybody will at some point have low periods where they have a little self-doubt, and sticking through that really is something I'm proud of because it's not the easiest thing. Because giving up sometimes is easier than sticking with it and just keeping the confidence that that's really what you're meant to do. And sorry, what was the second part
And
of it?
then, so that's what you're most proud of. And then what are you most grateful for?
I'm grateful for having had opportunities that let me show that I deserve these opportunities. Because sometimes you just get, you know, a band not having worked with you before, but they trust you in that moment to do their work, and to not constantly having to prove yourself to others. That's really something I'm grateful for, because a lot of musicians have this whole trust in you to just, yep, you're kind of in charge of how it's going to sound. So there you go, you know. And it's something I'm very grateful for, and for everyone that really helped me along the way. Like, there have been so many engineers and producers that really just opened up and helped me and just told me, you know, like, you can do it like this, it might be easier for you. And getting that support. And even like I've been working with Darren a lot, right? Because him and I work together here, and he has been very helpful in that regard too. Like, he showed me a lot of the earliest things I had to learn, because coming from school is a very different thing. Like, he was the one basically teaching me, Jill, you have to get more patience, which he was very right about, but also it's all about psychology. That's something he always keeps saying, and I didn't get it at first, but as soon as I started working with people, I got it. Like, if people are not in the right mindset, they won't perform. So if they want to talk about a traumatic experience, let them talk. Just let them get it out. And that's one of the things he really instilled in me. Like, I'm very grateful for that kind of knowledge. Like, you know, just to let people be themselves, because music is very fragile.
So you're talking about Darren, is it Magarowski? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Magorowski. It's a hard G.
Magarowski. There you
Mhm.
go, Magarowski. So just wanted to get his name out there for those that are listening. So I know him from Metalworks, so we both have a history of Metalworks, and he does some great work. We're gonna have him as a guest on the podcast in the near future, and just like you, he provided some behind the scenes information for the Alexisonfire album for that episode. So we appreciate him. So wanted to give him a shout out. So there's something we do on the podcast where we have a guest provide a question for a future guest without knowing who that guest is. They just provide whatever comes to them. It could be funny, it could be memorable, it could be quirky, it could be serious. And what's kind of funny is you mentioned that one of the first Canadian bands that you enjoyed in Germany was Billy Talent, and my last guest was Billy Talent's current drummer while out on tour, because you have Jordan Ratbeard is out on tour with Alexisonfire. So we have Lowell Campbell from Winter Sleep, my favorite band of all time. He's filling in with Billy Talent on drums for their tour. So the question comes from Lowell Campbell, and he asks, what is your favorite plant? So it might be the strangest or quirkiest question in the podcast history, but that is the question for you.
It kind of depends. First of all, like it changes. Whichever plant survives is always one I really like. Right now, Monstera plants survive for some reason, and Tradescantias. For some reason, the spider plants, which I've been a fan of forever, they started dying in my house. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I'm not like, I love gardening, but I'm really bad at it. Like I'm bad at the regular watering and stuff. I'm more of a free for all. Like when I remember, I do it kind of thing. So I need very strong plants to do that. That's why I like outside plants a lot, especially perennials.
Where they're just
Even
getting
blooming.
sun and rain and they're
They just
self-sufficient.
survive. If you get like an eastern cactus in Canada, that's the only cactus I think that is native in Canada. Love them. You don't have to do anything. Actually, if you water it, you kill it. So you just let it do its thing. It's going to stay. It's just going to multiply. Irises, they come back every year, no matter what you do. I'm a fan of easy plants.
Yeah, I'm impressed because you gave like actual plant names that I've never even heard of them. So you gave like a good answer for favorite plant. I was given a cactus, knowing they basically can't die. Really, I was given a cactus once as a gift, and it's still alive. So I kept a cactus alive. I'm very proud of myself, and I actually have a reminder in my calendar every 2 weeks to water that cactus, because if I kill a cactus, I mean, I don't know, I'll never hear the end of it. So
I have killed a cactus before. I'm not doing well with indoor
that's
cactus.
tough. That's a tough break.
Outdoor.
Yeah, I have one final question. If you could go back in time and you could sit down next to your 10-year-old self, and you could take everything you've learned since 10 years old up to whatever age you are now, all those lessons and the journeys and the dreams and the highs and lows and the mentorship and schooling, everything that's happened since 10 years old. If you could go back and whisper some words of advice to cute little 10-year-old Jill that's sitting there to help her navigate this human life, what advice do you give to Jill?
I'd say just keep following your gut and really enjoy life where you are, because unfortunately it's only getting harder. It's something that as a kid you always think, oh, well, after school it's going to be good. After university it's going to be good. No, it's only going to get harder. So just relax. Enjoy your childhood, enjoy wherever you are, and just follow your gut. Because if something doesn't feel right, it usually isn't.
That's great advice. And for our listeners that have stuck with us for the last 2 hours, where do they find you online if they want to see what you're up to, or maybe send a message to say, I love the interview, or I loved your work on this album, or hey, I'm a musician, I'd love to work with you in the future? Where do they go online?
So my website is jillzimmermann.com, but 2 N's at the end, as per our first, Zimmermann with 2 N. And aside from that, on Instagram and I think Facebook maybe too, it's Audiotic Jill. It came from a joke that I had with a friend where he said it's idiotic but with audio. Nobody gets the joke. It's fine, but I'm stuck with it now. So It's AUDIOTICJILL. And that at gmail.com is my email too.
Perfect. And as we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you for your lifelong pursuit of mastery as an audio engineer. I want to commend you for taking that leap of faith, moving from Germany to Canada. I want to thank you for helping all our great Canadian bands. You're helping them to sound better and to make better albums, hence all the Juno nominations. I want to thank you for your work on the Alexisonfire album, Otherness. I mentioned it a bunch of times. In my opinion, one of the best albums of 2022 and one of my most listened to albums of the year. So stuff that you've worked on has been the soundtrack to my life since you've moved to Canada. And last but not least, I want to thank you for sitting down with me for the last 2 hours for this interview. As a musician and as someone with an audio engineering background, it's extra special for me to really pick your brain and ask questions that I want to know the answers to. So thank you so much for your time, Jill. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It was my pleasure.
You're very welcome. So to our listeners, to the Jill fans, to the fans of all the bands she's worked with, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.